Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. When rapid technological advancement meets tragedy, what truly drives innovation? Is it unfettered freedom or maybe responsive control? We're looking today at the huge global race for self-driving technology, and specifically China's position, which is fueled by just unprecedented scale. Now, the common assumption is often that this lightning speed comes from, secrecy or maybe lax rules. What we really need to ask, is China's dominance actually the result of a surprisingly effective structured regulatory process? Maybe one that Western firms would even envy.
That's exactly the question, isn't it? And it's the essential pivot we need to make in how we understand this. The core narrative usually just focuses on the speed of adoption. We've seen this incredibly swift expansion of driver assist features right across the board. But the global spotlight really turned intensely on China this spring. That was after the highly publicized and really tragic Xiaomi SU7 crash that killed 3 passengers. And while that kind of incident immediately makes you think, okay, the rules must be too loose, the operational details suggest something much more nuanced is actually happening.
Right. Let's ground this in the numbers first, because the scale China is operating on is genuinely defining the global market. I mean, they aren't just participating. They seem to be setting the entire pace.
Exactly. To really get the momentum, you have to look at level 2 systems first.
Yes.
L2.
Yeah, the driver assist ones.
Right. These are the features that handle steering, acceleration, braking. But critically, and this is key, they require constant active human supervision. Always. And currently, more than half, actually over half of the new passenger cars sold in China already qualify as L2 enabled.
Wow.
Yeah. And Morgan Stanley is projecting that by 2030, China alone will probably account for half of the world's L2 and higher vehicles. Half the world's total.
And it moves far beyond just assistance, right? The real ambition is full autonomy level 4 robotaxis, the ones that are fully driverless within specific defined zones. The forecasts here are even more dramatic. Goldman Sachs projects China will have something like 632,000 level 4 robotaxis deployed by 2030. Compare that to the forecast for America, just 35,000.
It's a huge difference.
And we aren't talking about small test sites on campuses anymore. Wuhan, for example, is already using fully driverless taxis across service areas measured in thousands of square kilometers. That's real commercial deployment right now.
And this speed, this scale, it immediately challenges that idea that the regulatory environment is just a free-for-all. Because look, when you introduce that much tech that quickly, accidents are, well, sadly, inevitable. The real test of the system isn't whether accidents happen, but how swiftly and decisively the governing body responds when they do.
Which brings us right back to that tragic Xiaomi incident this spring. The conventional wisdom, the sort of simple narrative, would suggest a government focused only on tech progress would just, try to bury the story. But the reality of the regulatory response was surprisingly swift and public.
It really was. What's fascinating here is that the intervention wasn't, say, judicial or drawn out. It was administrative and technological. The State Administration for Market Regulation quickly jumped in. They mandated a huge over-the-air and OTA safety recall. That affected about, 117,000 SU7 vehicles almost immediately.
An OTA recall, so software update pushed out?
Essentially, yes. Forced software fix. And simultaneously, authorities convened around 60 automakers, basically called them in, and they issued an explicit warning against overselling L2 systems, particularly advertising them as autonomous driving, which they're not.
And did the companies listen?
Apparently so. Reports suggest firms immediately adjusted their marketing messages, like before the next major auto show even began.
Okay, so that swift action does demonstrate a clear operational lever for, let's call it, quicker corrective action. But let me push back a little here. That process is certainly fast, but is a mandatory OTA recall, maybe without high-stakes public litigation, actually less transparent for the public in the long run? Are they kind of trading that judicial accountability we often see in the West for sheer speed and administrative compliance?
That's a really important question, and it touches on different philosophies of oversight. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the goal seems to be optimizing for iteration speed, learning and fixing fast. The Western system, which is often heavily driven by liability fear and, frankly, fragmented state-by-state legal systems, can significantly slow down innovation, even when regulators agree on what needs fixing.
Yeah, the lawsuits can drag on for years.
Exactly. Whereas in China, the regulatory mechanism seems much more operational. Cities open up test zones, regulators meet directly with automakers, new draft rules get published quickly after incidents. That seems to be the real engine of acceleration here. It's really a process story, not a story of regulatory blindness or, just letting anything go.
So if the secret fuel isn't censorship, and it's not just anarchy, the real engine is this concept you mentioned earlier. Responsive regulation built on massive pilots.
Precisely. We could define it as maybe managed acceleration. That feels right. It's like giving permission to experiment, but coupling it with quicker corrective action when things go wrong. It's structured speed. It's definitely not laissez-faire. There are very clear guardrails, but those guardrails are constantly being adjusted based on the operational data coming in from all those tests.
And we see those guardrails in the details, right? Like regulators actually publishing bans on confusing terms, explicitly forbidding autonomous driving in ads for L2 systems.
Yes, they're actively trying to manage consumer expectations, build trust, you could argue. And crucially, they're hardening the technological safety floor while allowing the experimentation to continue. For instance, there are draft national L2 safety standards being reviewed right now. And what's in them? Things like requirements for automatic disengagement if driver inattention is detected. Much stricter driver monitoring requirements, too.
So they're demanding the tech itself gets better at watching the driver.
Essentially, yes, demanding better attention systems alongside the driving assist features, raising the bar.
Okay, let's dig into the heart of this operational model then, which you said is closer to sandboxing, using these massive cities as like living laboratories. This seems to be where the sheer volume of data really comes into play.
That's absolutely the critical component. The approach is basically test first, regulate later. But maybe more accurately, test first, gather data, then write the rules using that data. The model involves letting these pilots run locally across dozens of cities, gathering just enormous amounts of real-world data, and only then using all that information to finalize and harden the national rules.
And the scale of these local labs is just hard to fathom sometimes.
It really is. You mentioned over 50 cities have developed their own distinct regulatory frameworks just for testing, and the central government has approved over 32,000 kilometers of roadway across the country, specifically for these autonomous driving tests.
32,000 kilometers.
And think about the volume of data generated. Beijing's test fleets alone accumulated 39 million kilometers of data by the end of last year, 2023.
39 million kilometers. That's what, nearly 1,000 trips around the equator. What makes that volume of data so powerful for rulemaking compared to, say, the more theoretical safety models often used elsewhere?
Well, it's the classic difference between theory and practice, isn't it? That sheer volume of real-world data shows regulators precisely where the edge cases pop up, where drivers fail to intervene correctly, how the technology actually performs under messy, unpredictable, real-world traffic conditions. This lets them write standards that target actual operational risks based on thousands and thousands of observed failures and successful interventions. It's less driven by the theoretical legal liability of what could potentially go wrong, which, as we discussed, tends to slow things down quite a bit in Western systems.
We should probably quickly define L3 here, because you mentioned it plays a big role in these new national standards. We know L2 needs constant attention. What's the jump to L3 mean, and why is that distinction so critical for the public?
Right, L3 is that tricky transition point. It's often called conditional automation. Basically, L3 lets you, the driver, look away briefly, maybe even engage in secondary tasks like check an email under very specific conditions. But, and this is the crucial part, you must be ready to take back control when the car explicitly asks you to. The new standards being drafted make the requirements for that handover that switch back to human control very, very explicit.
And there are still limits, even with L3.
Oh, absolutely. All these automated driving systems, L2, L3, even L4, are constrained by their ODD, their operational design domain. That just means the specific conditions, things like weather, time of day, road type, speed limits, mapping data availability, where the system is actually designed to function safely. Outside that ODD, it won't work or shouldn't be used.
Okay. So if we compare this managed acceleration or structured speed approach to what's happening in Europe and America, the contrasts seem pretty stark.
They really are. Europe, generally speaking, takes a much more cautious, safety-first stance. You often hear manufacturers there lamenting the very strict limitations on road testing and actual deployment. It's slower. In the U.S., well, firms are certainly aggressive with L2 expansion. We see that everywhere. But they operate under this constant looming threat of massive litigation. Plus, you have very intense state-by-state public scrutiny and often differing regulations. It's fragmented.
Yeah, the liability fear is definitely a big factor here.
It is. And in contrast, the Chinese regulatory approach seems to use tools like those big OTA recalls we talked about as a decisive centralized intervention method. It allows safety fixes to be pushed out quickly across the entire fleet potentially without necessarily stopping the core innovation process dead in its tracks.
And the crucial nuance here, and this is maybe the thing that really validates the whole Chinese approach, is that the system is now attracting and apparently winning over major global players. This isn't just some walled garden for domestic Chinese firms anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And this really moves the conversation beyond just a simple China-only tech story. We've seen major established firms starting to validate the local ecosystem. For example, reports indicate that Volkswagen, a massive Tier 1 global incumbent, plans to use XPeng's advanced driver assistance stack, their system called XNGP, on its EVs sold in the China market.
That VW-XPeng partnership is highly significant, isn't it? It's not just a typical joint venture on manufacturing. It suggests a pretty deep trust in the local supply chain and the technology itself. What does that really signify about the maturity of this China-born tech?
It signifies trust. Trust in the data, trust in the software standards, trust in the underlying tooling. For a global giant like VW to essentially rely on a Chinese competitor's proprietary tech stack, well, it implies they believe the performance is superior, or at least highly competitive. It also suggests they think the safety protocols are adequate, and that the local data collection, remember those 39 million kilometers in Beijing alone, provides a real competitive advantage. An advantage they maybe can't replicate quickly enough internally or get from their existing Western partners for the China market.
So the technology born from this massive rapid iteration cycle is now demonstrably globally competitive, at least within China for now.
It certainly appears that way, yes. It's attracting serious investment and partnerships from established global players.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it seems China's policy is clearly walking a kind of tightrope. They're balancing the strategic importance of achieving tech leadership in this critical area with the need to maintain public trust, especially after high-profile accidents like the Xiaomi one, which means the initial assumption that they'll just relax rules for speed is probably wrong. If anything, the guardrails seem to be getting tighter, but tightened based on real-world experience, not just theory.
Yes, I'd say they're tightening pragmatically. So for you, the listener, if you're monitoring this space, there are probably 3 key things to watch that will really determine the future trajectory. First, keep a close eye on the final version of that national L2 standard and its compliance timeline. Specifically, look at the precise requirements they land on for driver monitoring and those automatic disengagement systems. Those will set the safety baseline for the entire industry there.
Makes sense. And second,
focus on the city-level scaling metrics. Try to move beyond just the big, flashy forecasts. Pay attention to the actual number of autonomous licenses being granted, the total kilometers of approved test roads being added, and especially those detailed service area maps in key cities like Wuhan and Beijing. Those localized ground-level metrics are the truest proxies we have for real-world readiness and actual deployment scale, not just ambition.
Okay, so track the national rules and the city-level proof points. And finally,
yes, keep tracking those cross-border partnerships exactly like the VW XPeng one. Does that advanced technology stay localized mainly for the unique demands of the China market? Or do we start seeing global OEMs leveraging that China-born tech and expertise for broader global applications? That will be the ultimate indicator of whether this model produces truly world-leading exportable technology. The takeaway here seems to be that efficient regulatory iteration, this learning by doing at massive scale, can be an incredibly powerful tool for technological advancement.
So maybe the final thought to leave with everyone is this. If China's success, their secret fuel as it were, is truly this efficient regulatory iteration, a structured model enabling rapid learning and correction based on huge amounts of data, does this suggest that perhaps Western approaches, often dominated by liability fear and more fragmented regulation, might inherently handicap technological acceleration in fields like this? Something to think about as this global race continues to speed up. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.